So where do joy and happiness collide? What does it look like when it does? And where do we see it in the chapters that we're studying today? Hi, I'm Heather, and we are at the feet of Jesus, where we are going through the entire Bible, one book at a time, and we are still this week and next week in the book of Genesis. And so I am so glad that you joined us, and I'm so glad you're paying attention. We are in Genesis 46 and 47 this week. We only have one more week, and we're going to do 48, 49, and 50, and then we are going to be done with Genesis. And we're going to have another book of the Bible finished. So we have finished Luke, we have finished Acts, and this will be our third, Genesis. So what are we doing next? Let me show you what we're doing next. We have the workbook ready. Are you ready? Are you ready? Exodus. And so you may have figured it out already, but I am thrilled that we are doing Exodus. It is such a beautiful continuation of the story we have learned here in Genesis. So it is perfect. And then I get to start studying for the next workbook already. See, I'm always a workbook ahead of you. And so I cannot wait. I am just going to be on pins and needles for the next 4 months until I'm able to tell you what we're doing next. But I've been praying about it, and I really feel like I have that idea of what we're doing. And so anyway, get your Exodus book now. It's at Amazon. It's $9.95. If you live here in Albuquerque, I will cut you a deal. Anyway, I would love to help you with this. So get this workbook so that you can do this with us. So Genesis 46, 47. What do we have to learn? A lot. We're going to learn about when joy and happiness collide and what it looks like. And I cannot wait. So let's do a simple overview of Genesis 46 and 47. I am in my Bible. Pull yours out and we'll go to town. So first of all, right at the beginning of Genesis 46, we have God talking to Jacob and saying, you know what? I've got you on this. Trust me. Go to Egypt. This is going to be a good thing. And so he does. And the rest of chapter 46 is spent working through all the different people and the children of Jacob and the grandchildren of Jacob and all the people that went to Egypt. And so that's chapter 46 until the end. Now, our highlighted verses this week are going to be Genesis chapter 46, verses 28 through the end of the chapter of 46. Then we hit on chapter 47, and chapter 47 is awesome. It is where Joseph goes and talks to the Pharaoh about his family being here and how amazing it is. And then Pharaoh trusting Joseph enough to make his family the chief shepherds. And then we get to Joseph dealing with the famine and the horrific time that the Egyptians had in dealing with this and how bad the famine truly was. We really get an idea of how bad it was. And you know what? Just to spend a moment here, I know that there's some correlation, I think maybe a smidge, with how we have dealt as a world with, this was a worldwide famine. We have dealt with a worldwide pandemic. And just the correlations, there are, I think, some in what people had to do to survive the famine. And they started by buying grain, and then they went to dealing with it, with giving them their herds, and then giving them themselves. And what have we had to do with our famine? You know, I think with our pandemic, I think with our pandemic, we have dealt with similar things. You know, we've dealt with a lot of death. We've dealt with a lot of fear. There's fear in a famine. We don't know if they didn't know if they were going to be able to put food on their table. And there have been a lot of people that have dealt with a lot of fear through the pandemic of, are we going to catch this? Are we going to give it to others if we catch it? I know for me, I've never really been afraid that I was going to catch it. My fear was, if I do, I don't want to give it to someone who might be compromised health-wise, and what that would look like. That was my big fear. But we've dealt with a lot of fear. We've dealt with the fear of, are we going to put food on the table because of money? So anyway, we get to see Joseph's heart in doing his job, doing the job he's supposed to do for Pharaoh, doing the job that has been set before him. Remember, we have learned through chapters previous that no matter what the path was that God had him on, whether he was slave or prisoner or now second in charge of Egypt, Joseph really felt like the biggest thing he was supposed to do was do whatever job was in front of him well. And so this is no different. Joseph is trying to do his job for Pharaoh well, while also helping the people of the world be able to eat and taking care of God's children. And so that's interesting. And then at the very end of chapter 47, we have Joseph's vow to Jacob that he will take his father when his father dies and help bury him in the land of Canaan where his family is. So there we are. Why don't we get to our highlighted verses? By the way, a new scenery. This usually you're on my kitchen counter. Now we are on the couch together because I love being on the couch with my friends, studying the Bible, and you are one of my friends. So I'm excited that you're here with me. Okay, so let's read, shall we? So I am in Genesis chapter 46, verse 28. Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph. So this is Jacob. Jacob sent Judah, one of his older children, and he sent Judah before him. So that means before everybody. He sent Judah before everybody to Joseph, kind of to meet him there, to actually tell Joseph that they were all coming, so that Joseph was prepared for the whole troop and tribe coming. And right before we learned how very many people we were talking about that were on their way. To point out before him the way to Goshen. So Goshen, where was Goshen? So we have the land of Egypt and we have Canaan. So Goshen was in Egypt, but right on the other side of the border from Canaan. So they were moving a long way, but they were moving to right inside the borders of Egypt. Why? I think there's some actual reasons we could look at on why. I think possibly, we read in just a minute. In fact, I'll keep going because we're going to read an interesting thing here in just a minute. So continuing in verse 28 toward the end of it, and they came to the land of Goshen. And then verse 29, so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. We'll talk about that moment in a minute, but he gets to Goshen. We find out he is able to stay in Goshen. Why did Joseph want him in Goshen? I think there's a few reasons. First of all, I think it was very fertile land. I think it was good land. I think it was close to Canaan. So it made for possibly a good getaway location. I think Joseph knew the pharaohs. He knew who he was dealing with. He has been dealing with them for years. He knew that he was favorable in the sight of this pharaoh, but he knew that favorability was a little bit fickle. And so I think he was being careful. At this point, I think it's important to talk about forgiveness versus being careful. And people talk to me because, as you've known, we have a marriage ministry. And in that marriage ministry, we talk quite a bit about forgiveness and how important it is to be forgiving. And I've had to learn that over the years. So forgiveness is saying out loud, I forgive so-and-so for whatever. I think it's good to say it out loud because then your own ears hear it as well as God. We can pray it. Absolutely, we can pray it and God will hear that. But when we say it out loud, we hear it. We hear what we are professing. I forgive Johnny for hurting my feelings. I forgive blank for blank. And I know that sometimes that forgiveness, saying that out loud, is one of the hardest things you will ever do. And I get that. But when we do forgive, we are cleansing our heart of the whole issue and we can move on. When we have not forgiven, we have that bitterness all stuck in our being and stuck in our soul. And when we forgive, that our soul is cleansed and we can move on. And so it's important to forgive. Perhaps, but it's also important to be careful. And I think being careful is something that we can do while being forgiving. So my husband has a saying that he says every once in a while, if you stick your hand in a barrel of snakes, the snake is going to bite you. We can forgive the snake because that is the character of a snake. But it doesn't mean we need to stick our hand back in the barrel, right? Okay, so be careful. And if you have a friend that truly hurt your feelings, if you have a parent or a loved one who has maybe physically or deep emotionally hurt you, you can forgive them, cleanse yourself. But then what you need to do is be careful of your interactions. That's where I really believe it's okay to have boundaries of where your relationship is going to be. If you would like prayer on that, if you would like to talk further on that, please, please, please comment in the comments. Why do I bring forgiveness up right here? Because I think Joseph had to forgive those people he has dealt with. Potiphar and the Pharaoh, he has had to deal with a lot of forgiveness while he was here. He knew what forgiveness looked like. And so that's also, I truly believe, why he was having his father stay on the border of Egypt so that his father and everybody could get away if they needed to, but also that was because the land was good there. It was good for the shepherds and for shepherding and for the flocks. So there we go. Let's keep reading, shall we? I told you in verse 29 toward the end, it says, so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. You know, it's kind of interesting here. And I love that we don't know. We don't know who fell on whose neck and who cried for a good while. We don't know. Isn't that cool? We don't know. We don't know if it's Joseph who fell on his father's neck or his father who fell on Joseph's neck. I think that means that it was such a beautiful reunion. Such an amazing reunion that we don't need to know who fell on whose neck because they both fell on each other's neck and they both cried for a long while. You know, they both loved each other deeply and dearly. And my next point is coming in the next verse. So verse 30, and Israel said to Joseph, now let me die since I have seen your face because you are still alive. This is what I was hinting at the opening of our talk today. This is where happiness and joy collide. He's not actually saying, okay, I want to die now. That's not what he's getting at. He's saying, I can die now. I can die and be a happy man because I've seen my son that I love. This is awesome. So he is experiencing pure joy and happiness. Okay, what's the difference? Happiness is what we think of happiness being. It's something that happens to us from the outside that just makes us happy. It's, I saw my son for the first time in years and I thought he was dead. That's happiness. It's, I got a compliment from my husband. That's happiness. It's, I had an amazing lunch with a friend today. That's happiness. Okay, that's something that happens from the outside. Joy happens from the inside out. The cool thing about joy is joy can collide with happiness like we see here. But it doesn't have to be in conjunction with happiness. Joy can be in the midst of struggle. Joy can be in the midst of a trying time. Joy can be in the midst of questioning. You know, I have dealt for several years with my son's health. I talk about that here and there. My son had a health scare a couple weeks ago. I also mentioned that. And we had joy that day. We had joy that day, both of us, because we trust God, and the trust in God within us exudes to this joy. It's a calm, it's a peaceful, it's a trusting feeling, knowing that God's got this. That's why my tagline is what it is in this video. God's got this. God's got it. He's in charge of my son's health. He's in charge of my son's life. He's in charge of my well-being. And he's in charge of you and your well-being and your family's well-being and your financial situation and your relationships. He's in charge of it all, and he's got this. That's joy, that peace, that trust, that faith that just is beyond understanding. That's joy. And right here, Joseph and his father Jacob, they are experiencing peace and joy and happiness and the collision of it. And it's so awesome. So here's my first question. When was the last time that peace, well, I keep saying peace, but joy and happiness collided in your life? I would love to know. Okay, let's keep reading, shall we? Then Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who are in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, not for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they've brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even till now, both we and also our fathers. And you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. That's kind of an interesting thing. I was like, okay, if they're an abomination, why is Joseph saying, go to Pharaoh and tell him, this is where I am? You know, I think, again, Joseph knew Pharaoh, and he trusted in God. He has had to learn over and 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 over in the last few chapters, trust God, trust God, trust God, trust God, trust God. You know, God provided all those lessons for Joseph to trust him, and it built up to a culmination of this event. So if you are going through seasons of difficulty, I'm going to echo what I said a few weeks ago. Trust God. Do the very best job that God is putting you in right now, and know that he's got your back, and know that he's teaching you something, and know that you're learning something. Because just like Joseph, you are going to be able to stand in front of whomever and tell the truth and know that you are doing the will of God. And he was. Here we go. So, an abomination. I think that last thing is really quite interesting that we want to talk about. Many scholars think that this can be traced back to Abraham and Sarah. Do you remember that whole situation back toward the middle of Genesis, where Abraham and Sarah go twice to Pharaoh and say that Sarah is Abraham's sister? Do you remember that? And so Abraham finds Sarah beautiful and takes her as one of his concubines. And then God puts a plague on him and says, You can't have her. She belongs to Abraham. And so God protects Abraham and Sarah, even though they're the ones that put them in their own hole with this whole situation. And by the way, fear put both of them there. And I think it's a good thing to go back and look at if you haven't gone through all these videos with me. But anyway, that's where a lot of scholars believe you can go all the way back to Abraham and Sarah and their interactions with those two Pharaoh to see why Egyptians don't trust shepherds, and specifically Hebrew shepherds. They were an abomination because of Abraham and Sarah. So those consequences of Abraham and Sarah really trying to lie out of fear had consequences generations in the future. Interesting. But Joseph, because God put Joseph right where he needed to be, Joseph was able, through this generation and through this Pharaoh, to present a trust again of Hebrew shepherds. And so Joseph's family is able to stay, and then we have the rest of chapter 46. And I already gave the interesting little points to that. So let's go to the workbook. We are still in the Genesis workbook. Again, all these workbooks are available on Amazon for $9.95, and they are right there for the picking. There's a Luke workbook, an Acts workbook, a Genesis workbook, and now an Exodus workbook. So, what is the main theme? I picked the main theme to be God provides. Gosh, God provided all over the place in these two chapters, didn't he? He provided a reunion, a beautiful reunion between Joseph and his family. He provided grain for his family. He provided a beautiful place for them to live that was rich, and provided all sorts of things that their herds and their family would need. It also provided a quick getaway if need be. And God provided an opportunity for forgiveness. So I just am going to touch on that one more time. If you are dealing with hurt, God is providing you right now an opportunity for forgiveness. Again, if you need help with that, if you need to talk it through, make a comment and in the comments here, and we'll talk about it. I would be happy and honored to help you. So then we have theological implications. I have, as children of the living God, he will provide everything we need. Everything. I love that. All we have to do is trust him. And when we trust him, he provides what we need. He provides what we need anyway. But if we trust him, we have freedom. What is my application with that? Oh boy, I see it in my life all over the place. The more I trust that he is providing what I need, the more I see that he is providing. So that's another question I have for today. What is God providing in your life, in your situation, that maybe you need to remember and notice that that's God? That's not humans providing something at the right time. It's humans being used to provide what God wants to provide for you. So is there something that God's providing for you right now? Okay, so individual verses. Oh, one of my favorites is Genesis 46:30. And we already read it, but I'm going to read it again. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." Friends, happiness and joy can collide in your life whenever you notice those things happening. When you have true happiness in the near future, I'd love you to just stop and think of all the things that God, through his divine providence, had to arrange for that event to occur. That's when joy will exude from your soul, and you'll start to see God in his awesomeness. Oh, love it. Okay, and then the very last thing we're going to talk about is actually kind of cool. It is the study verse for the week. So our study verses that we were to read dip into Genesis 45 to get the context. So it was Genesis 45:25 through Genesis 46:4. Our study verse was Genesis 46:3. And that says, "So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will. I will be there with you." Okay, what can we get out of that? What can we get out of that? You know what I really centered on? I centered on the God of our Father. That just connected with me. Right there, the God of your Father. And I had to sit with that for a little bit. Don't be too much in a hurry. If God puts something on your heart and you want to sit with it for a minute, sit with it for a minute. Pray and open your mind to Jesus and let Jesus speak to you and give you ideas. What finally came to me was, and I'm going to read this because I really sat with it for a little bit because I knew God wanted to tell me something through those, 5 words? The God of your Father. And this is what God spoke to my heart. God graciously reminds us of his promises, doesn't he? This specifically is reminding us of the covenant that he made with Abraham. That we are part of through Jesus. So even though we may not be Jewish, you may have Jewish heritage, I don't, but I am part of that lineage through Jesus. And all through the Old Testament, he gives us promises and he reminds us over and over. He reminds certain people who he's talking to, the God of your fathers, the God of your father Abraham, the God of your father Isaac and Jacob. He reminds over and over. And that's why it struck me. There must be a reason he reminds us. He reminds us of our fathers, our forefathers. And it struck me. Those are promises. That is a promise. What is the promise? That he is our God and that we are his children. That he won't leave us or forsake us. And that he is arranging good for his children through his purposes. He could say once and for all, okay, so I've made this promise to Jacob that I made in the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, that is for everybody. And in the New Testament, it's even for Gentiles through Jesus' sacrifice. Got it? Okay, good, because I'm not going to tell you again. He could do that, but he doesn't. He reminds us all the time. And then Jesus came to the earth and Jesus reminded us all the time. I love that. I love that. So what has Jesus promised you? What has God promised you? That is what we're going to put at the feet of Jesus today. God's promises. God's promises he has made through the Bible, and possibly, perhaps, the promises he's made to you specifically. If he has made a promise to you, I would love to celebrate those promises with you in the comments. One of the things I think he has promised me is that my son will be healed. And I pray for that. But you know what? I pray for that and I trust God that he's got it on his timing. Friends, I love you. I thank you. We have 131 subscribers. Can you believe that? Woo! If you are one of those new subscribers, thank you for joining us. We love you, and I pray for you each week, all 131 of you. And so until next week, my friends, I love you. I pray for you. And remember, no matter what you go through this week, that God's got this.